Met you around Occupy,
Yeah.
I believe, in Grand Parade is probably where we met first.
Yep.
What have you always been drawn to? Have you always been so political? Have you always been willing to put your body in the way of what you think is right?
I would say no. I would say I was rather apolitical for probably most of my life. I guess that had something to do with the way I was raised. I was kind of raised in a rather Zionist household.
Okay.
So there was kind of a bit of, I don't know, a lot of kind of propaganda coming in the door, Simon Wiesenthal, Nazi hunter kind of stuff. And so it was a genuine, like, atmosphere of kind of like, you know, that sort of created kind of fear of stuff that might come at you because you're Jewish or stuff like that. So I didn't really get any, you know, kind of political activity in my life probably until about 2011, literally.
Really?
So
what was it about that movement, about Occupy then, that did that said, hey, I'm going to put my hand up, or like I'm going to be noticed in a way, instead of the maybe get along to go along kind of vibe?
Well, what happened for me with Occupy was that just prior to that summer, well, I mean, I arrived here in 2010. So, and from there I was, you know, trying to be a musician and touring across the country on a bike. Things weren't really, you know, going well in terms of a music career. I was, you know, kind of relying on being a harmonica player, and that wasn't really going
At the
anywhere.
White House.
Well, you know, that's
we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Part two.
So, so I began to, I got sponsored to ride an electric bike across the country, and sort of blog about it and book these shows throughout like tiny small town provinces, you know, like all over the map. Wherever I could get a show, I'd go on an electric bike and write about it. So it was kind of like a burnout scenario waiting to happen, right? How are you going to write, play a show, bike 200 kilometers or 150 kilometers in a day? And what I began to find was that there was a lot more sort of interest in my part in sort of writing about where I was, giving a point of precedent to whose traditional territory I was passing through, sort of looking into you know, local legends, local lore, kind of stuff like that, and it was really fulfilling me quite a bit more than playing to, you know, 30 drunks or whatever, like on a hit or miss scenario where you're like, I want to be a musician, but people are just getting wasted, or there's nobody here in Russell, Manitoba, or whatever, right? So it was a hard sort of transition, and I hadn't really lived anywhere stable for probably all of my adult life until I got here, and then I just sort of decided that I would just live here and just sort of have those experiences, like what it would be to live in a home and what it would be to have a dog and like those sort of like homey things, because I had sort of cruised down various back roads for, you know, several years anyway, and hadn't really experienced stability.
Prior to being on the bike and doing these things, were you a writer? Was that something that was...
I've always written. Yeah, I've always written. I always found, you know, sort of a great escape in that manner. I can remember writing stories in like junior high and stuff like this, like grade 5, grade 6. So I think once I started writing, I don't know when you know, children or young adults get the ability to write, but I always remember enjoying writing. Yeah.
Out of Occupy, and I don't want to dwell on that because I think, like, people that are interested in your involvement with that and everything, I think that has sort of been decently well documented, somewhat. And we could always go into that if you'd like to. I
didn't really tell you why I got into Occupy.
No, you didn't.
I think I got sort of sidetracked by something else. But
the bike.
Okay, so getting politicized.
All right, I like this.
It's fun to have such a long conversation because then you're like, okay, well, we can actually talk about it.
Yeah, we can stretch it out here.
Okay, so
comfy, put your feet up.
Started doing journalism here in probably late 2010, 2011, and then got myself a press pass. I was very much convinced that if I continued to write, things would happen in my
You're
life.
the reason I got my first press pass, by the way.
So I got a press. Thanks. I'm not
Because
sure.
I was like,
sure why, but
you sent me a thing about going to, I think it was like when all those wackos of all the countries that want to militarize everything come here like every year.
Yeah,
and you
International
were like, dude,
Security
you
Forum.
should sign up to this and we'll go piss them off. But you didn't really say that part, but
Yeah.
it was implied.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that one, but then I started applying to other ones, and I think I got one to something. I forget what it was, but I was like, thanks, Miles. You made me think I should do that.
That was a game changer for me, getting that press pass
Okay,
to
so
the
you get the
International
press pass.
Security Forum.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
And I'm not sure, like,
Panetta.
I'm not particularly sure, but I didn't really like grow up or get maybe indoctrinated, and those are big words, like, but
Huge.
in a journalism school, let's say. So the sort of rehashing of press passes or press releases, and sort of going through channels where you have an editor or advertisers to keep in mind.
Sure.
I had no interest in that from the get-go, to sort of be beholden to anybody's sort of editorial kind of like on my words.
Right.
If it wasn't going to make it more poignant or more pointed, I wasn't interested in getting muzzled by whatever. So I started covering stuff like Kevin Nish, for example, came through town, and he was a survivor from the Mavi Marmara. He was the only Canadian that was on that boat where 8 Turks and 1 Turkish American were executed by the Israeli military when they boarded that boat trying to get to Gaza in 2010.
Right.
So I interviewed him, and it was kind of a story that people weren't touching. And I didn't really care to even bother to figure out why, but it wasn't like Kevin Nish is in town. And to me, that was like, wow, that's a really important story. This man has a very important perspective to share. So, gave him full time and, sat down with the man and went to his screening and talked to him. And then from there, I guess kind of started getting the attention of the Boat to Gaza steering committee, that there were a couple members in town. And then going to the security forum, and there was a press conference, and Ehud Barak came in the room. And it was an entirely boring press event. Like, it was, several days of sitting in this small room with all these journalists, and you'd get, your cookies and your tea, and you'd sit around
Recycled air.
watching screens of what was actually going on. And then there was a point where Janet Napolitano and Ehud Barak came in there, and they brought in with their handlers. And these are some of Janet Napolitano was Secretary of State, I believe, or Homeland Security.
Well, I think it was Homeland Security, yeah.
And Ehud Barak was former Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of Israel. At the point, he was Minister of Defense. I believe he's still Minister of Defense. And it was kind of like all the same questions, like, any questions for this man? And they're like, what will we do about the threat of Iran? And blah, 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 blah. Do they think they have the bomb? And
Softball.
this nonsense. And I could feel I felt like my whole body was a beating heart. Like, I was just like, oh my God, there's a moment in time, like, dum, dum. And it's like, any questions? And I was like, me, I have a question. And I'm looking at Ehud Barak, and I'm like, knowing that you had the technology to simply disable the Mavi Marmara at sea, why did you choose to board it in an extremely hostile, maneuver in the middle of the night, which led to the execution of 9 men? And then following up on that, knowing that there's a Canadian boat to Gaza headed there in 2011, should the Canadians expect the same treatment? And he kind of was like, sort of not quite sure what to do, but they're pro-politicians, so sort of navigated around it. I don't remember precisely what his answer was, but it was kind of avoiding the question anyway.
Yeah.
And then they shuffled them out the room. And that went on live stream, and I sort of sent, and it was archived somewhere, and I sent that to somebody and said, like, hey, check out, I just kind of nailed Ehud Barak, cool, eh? And then they were like, do you want to go on the boat to Gaza as a journalist? And I was like, sure, let's go. And from there was a lot of training that went on to sort of, be ready to be killed or watch your friends be hurt and not react to that. So... And there was 4 or 5 days. I don't know what you learn in 4 or 5 days, but I know what I kind of learned in 4 or 5 days. And it was like, okay, this is really sort of a painful thought, but if, you're putting your life in your hands in a way. And it's not necessarily like, yes, I definitely don't want to die, but it was like, well, if that's what happens, then that's what we're all prepared to do. And if we're not prepared to do that, then we shouldn't be getting on that boat.
Fair enough.
And that was it.
It's reality.
Totally.
Reality check.
In the end, the Greek special forces stopped us, and we didn't have to. Nobody got hurt at all, and it didn't go that way. And I went on to Cairo and went to the Rafah border crossing, and that was like a naive, like that was sort of my first kick at the journal. Like that was my first sort of like journalism mission or whatever. And that was like, I had a letter from Kyle Shaw at the coast, and I presented it to an Egyptian border guard at Rafah, and I was like, "Hi, I'm here on assignment. Can I just get in?" And they're like, "No, definitely not. You can't."
We do love that, the way we bitch segment, but you can't come in.
Yeah. And then, some guys came up to me like, "You want to go through the tunnels?" And I was like, "I don't think that's going to be good, because if something happens, that's going to be a really crappy international incident almost." Like
right.
Like nobody's going to, Stephen Harper's not going to help me.
No.
If I crawl through a tunnel and start like interviewing Hamas and whatever, like I'm not going to be, life is going to change fundamentally at that point, and it's not going to be good. So I'm just going to go home. And then I flew back, and that was the summer of 2011. And then in the fall, this Occupy stuff started up. During my time in Cairo, I went to Tahrir Square, and I was definitely sort of like, trying to come down off like being boarded by the Greek special forces and being sort of like kind of attacked at sea. And like, I was just sitting there, and they had gone through some heavy stuff. Like a lot, like people had been killed defending that square. And they were sort of a little bit, like, not suspicious, but they were, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, I can't speak Arabic very well at all, but check it out. Like, here's my camera viewfinder, and here's the Palestinian flag flapping in the wind, and I was just on this boat that just got boarded." And they're like, "Whoa, like, okay, come with us." And then, went around and saw people on hunger strikes, and saw mothers whose children had been killed, and they're wearing their pictures, and they're all dressed in black. And it's just like, suddenly it was very serious. And it sort of became very clear what it takes to liberate and then hold a territory through all the state powers that, want that not to happen at all.
Exactly.
And so coming back here, it was definitely a spark, it was definitely like, whoa, Occupy, cool, like, let's do this. But I also, in the back of my mind, I knew the whole time it wasn't going to work. You know what I mean?
I do.
When push came to shove, I knew that we'd all cut and run, in a sense.
Yes.
And so that was how I got involved in that.
Right.